So have you guys ever seen a Bollywood horror movie? I actually hadn't until just recently, and now I've seen 6 of them. You see, what happened is I bought this Blu-ray box set that contains 6 Bollywood horror films. A company called Mondo Macabro put this out, and these films span all the way from the mid-1980s to the early 2000s. They're all produced by the Ramsey House of Horrors. The Ramseys are a giant family that made a lot of movies over in India, particularly horror films, and they made all of these. But why did I do this? Why did I buy this and then binge watch them all so fast? Am I a Bollywood fan? By the way, if you're new here, my name's Daniel. Welcome to Cobwebs. Actually, kind of. You see, what happened was a couple of years ago, I watched a movie called RRR, which is an Indian film that more than almost any other film out of India just really swept my country, the United States. A film that came out limited release here in theaters and made way more money than anybody expected, and actually got nominated for an Academy Award at the Oscars. Now, I should say technically RRR is not a Bollywood film. India is an extremely diverse country with a lot of different areas with their own film industries. Bollywood's actually just movies that are primarily based in Mumbai. That's as I understand it. RRR does not fit the category, but it's very much the style of Bollywood films, and I watched that movie and loved it. I just completely fell in love with it. 3 hours of cinematic bliss. It's just wild, but so sincere and heartfelt, and it kind of sent me on a path of checking out more Indian films. And I watched several Bollywood movies. I really enjoyed them, but everything that I saw was an action film, a blockbuster. I think India does that kind of movie really, really well, actually. So I was just recently thinking, what is a Bollywood horror film like? So I bought this and I watched them, and I want to talk to you about them. So let's talk about these movies in chronological order, which will be interesting because my personal assessment of the movie and my enjoyment watching it really ebbs and flows as we go. It's not like, oh, the early films are the good ones and then they really get bad. No, it's a real mix. The first one up is Piranha Mande, or by the English title that the Blu-ray case gives, The Haunted Temple. So even though I was watching a horror movie from a country I had never seen a horror movie from before, the beginning of the movie actually felt very familiar, a standard Gothic horror template. This film from 1984 kicks off 200 years in the past, where a village is very much afraid of this really spooky, witchy, demon kind of guy who lives up on the mountain named Samri. He's just one of these really scary guys. He's gonna take your children, he's gonna take your women, he's gonna sacrifice them to some kind of devil kind of thing. He's the witch. He's the witch of the movie, basically. And they all decide, we need to do something about this guy. So they go up to the mountain to capture him and sentence him to death. Now, if you've seen movies like Black Sunday, you're probably thinking this is probably the part where he's going to curse the family of the guy who is putting him to death. And that's exactly what happens. The curse is kind of an original one, though. He says that all the women in your family will now die in childbirth, which is a really chilling thing to say to somebody, especially when you got spooky demon powers. The guy gets beheaded, he gets buried, and then we go into the future to present day. And we kick off with the main guy's ancestor, who's kind of a rich, important guy, and he doesn't have a wife. Gee, I wonder why. And he has a very beautiful daughter, and he is terrified that his daughter might meet a guy, fall in love, get married, and then have a baby, and then die just like his wife did, just like all of the women in his family did. The movie actually has a flashback to his wife dying in childbirth, and this is going to sound horrible to say, but it's kind of awesome. That really sounds horrible to say, actually. But what happens is she gives birth, and then she turns into this grotesque monster thing, and then dies. So we get some cool practical effects in there. Pretty cool practical effects is something you're going to get in pretty much all of these movies, but the greatest effect in this movie is the guy who plays Samri. This guy is awesome. He's huge. He's got such an intimidating presence. He just makes for a phenomenal main monster in this film. So Piranha Mande very much sets the template for exactly what these movies are going to be. There's going to be a monster from the past. There's going to be a very soap opera dramatic romance between two young lovers. There's going to be musical numbers, and there's going to be comedy, all sprinkled in with some spooky horror. What? Did I just say musical numbers? Yes, I did, because if you didn't know, that's actually a hallmark of Bollywood films. They pretty much all have musical numbers. Now, in the modern ones, the modern action blockbuster ones that I had seen before I checked these out, they pretty much always have 2 musical numbers. This movie actually has 6. Now, the musical numbers you're going to get in these movies are what I can only describe as dorky. Like, they're very silly, very goofy. To really watch these movies, I feel like you have to have a very high tolerance for what is dorky and silly. And fortunately, I do. And when I watch the modern Bollywood films that I've seen, I actually think the musical numbers are kind of awesome. A lot of them have just spectacular dance choreography on display, and they're huge productions. And you really just have to admire the craft behind them. And they're kind of fun interludes among like a giant action extravaganza. Like, you never knew that you wanted a musical number in the middle of the Avengers, but when you watch a Bollywood film, you realize you kind of do. Now, the musical numbers in Piranha Mande are not great. They don't have amazing dance choreography. They're not incredible productions. I didn't find them to be great songs. A lot of the musical numbers you're going to get in this are a love song between the two young lovers about how much they love each other. You're probably going to get a breakup song where there's some like turmoil going on in their relationship, and they're going to sing about how sad they are. And 6 is just way too much. Now, how did they fit 6 musical numbers into one horror movie? Well, the movie is 2.5 hours long. That's another hallmark of Bollywood films that you kind of got to know. They're generally going to be very long. In the good ones, you don't really care. You don't really feel it. In Piranha Mande, you do, because there's too many musical numbers, and the comedy relief in this film is awful. It's probably the worst comedy relief of all of these movies because it has nothing to do with the actual film. The best of these movies has comedy relief that's kind of organically woven in, but this is a total side plot that we go to occasionally about some criminal who's on the loose. He's goofy beyond belief, and I just hated him, and I hated those parts of the movie. Let me tell you how crazy it is to watch this movie. So in the first 25 minutes of the film, I saw a demon dude killing people. I saw him get beheaded. I saw a Romeo and Juliet love story. I saw musical numbers, and I saw a kung fu fight scene. That's another thing in this movie. They often have action scenes as well, and the modern Bollywood films I've seen have incredible action scenes, like amazing. And these are pretty darn good too. The horror in this movie is fun. It has an incredibly loud, bombastic score that's just screaming spooky sounds to you constantly. Kind of reminds me of the Italian horror soundtracks from this time period. When this movie came out, it was actually a super mega hit blockbuster, and it really kicked off horror films being popular in India. It was actually the 4th highest grossing Bollywood film of its time. I enjoyed this movie. It definitely set the template for exactly what these films are going to be, but didn't do it the best, which meant you got something to look forward to. The next movie in the set is Virana, or the English title, Vengeance of the Vampire, from 1988. So this movie kicks off in a town where there is a beautiful, seductive witch who is going around seducing men and killing them. And when she kills them, she turns into this horrific monster, which is pretty awesome. And she might be sucking the blood, because the English title references vampires. So I feel like she's really more of a witch than a vampire, but there's definitely some vampiric-like influences in there. And this one guy decides he's had enough. He's going to go out and kill this witch. And as he's going to be pretty much successful with killing this witch, she ends up cursing his daughter. And when this happens, it's actually pretty awesome because she pulls the daughter into her coffin with her and closes it. Pretty creepy, actually. The first half hour of this movie is just like insanity overload, like so much spooky imagery, so many people dying. It's pretty awesome. But he does end up killing this witch. But then we go forward in time, like 10, 15 years, something like that. The daughter, now an adult, has been possessed by the witch. Now, the actress who plays the possessed daughter as an adult is pretty awesome in this movie, and she's known by the name Jasmine, but apparently she disappeared after the premiere of this film, and nobody really knows what happened to her, which is pretty intriguing. I did hear it say in a special feature on here that it seems like she's just living in New York and she just kind of left the business, but people don't really know for sure. The rest of the movie pretty much is watching this young woman be possessed by this witch. There's some cool kind of exorcist-like imagery in this, like head spinning and stuff like that. But she goes out and does seduce men and kill them. This movie actually had a lot of problems with the censors at the time. It didn't come out until 2 years after it was done because Bollywood film censors, they're more strict than here in America. Like if you watch 1980s horror films from America, you're probably going to see nudity. There's going to be a lot of sexuality and language and stuff. Not so in a Bollywood film. They're overall much cleaner because when you watch this movie, you kind of have a hard time believing the trouble with the censors. No nudity, sex is only implied, but a lot of stuff got cut out. But the the movie that we have left is pretty great. This movie is actually a big step up from Piranha Mande because it's definitely the template of that film, but everything about it is done better. So let's look at the young lovers plot. This is my favorite one of all these movies. This is my favorite couple. Our female lead is the cousin of the possessed woman, and she is just, this actress is adorable. She is just cute as a button, so charming and high energy. I just loved her in this movie. And the guy she gets paired up with is this pretty fun guy as well. And I just really, really like their relationship. They have this falling in love musical number that's super dorky again, but very charming and funny. So the musical numbers also are a step up from this because they do fit, I think, a function in the story better because you've got that falling in love musical number that's good, but also our possessed woman has like this siren song that she sings as she's seducing men to kill them. And that also feels like it works in the story more. A siren song of a succubus, you know, like that we understand that makes sense. The comedy is also better because it's not a side plot that we get sidetracked into. It's more organically woven in. Most of it comes from a comedy relief character whose name is Hitchcock, not Hitchcock, Hitchcock, but he is an aspiring film director. And a lot of his comedy comes from like horror movie references and stuff because he's this big horror buff. So he's kind of like Randy from Scream, but in an 80s Bollywood film. So that's actually pretty fun to watch. Piranha Mande felt long because it just felt like it was bouncing from thing to thing, just so it could fill up 2.5 hours, which I did not need it to fill up. It could have been shorter. This movie feels like one trajectory. It feels like a solid movie that moves from point A to point B, and it made it feel way shorter, even though it was still 2.5 hours long. The horror in this movie is awesome. This witch looks amazing. She's so spooky. There are these cult rituals because there's this whole cult that's like centered around her. There are these giant rock-headed weird minions that she has up in her spooky mountain or whatever that are just some of the craziest imagery I've ever seen. And something else you'll find about this movie is they're kind of shameless about stealing things. And this movie has quick shots from The Thing and the 1970s Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Next up, we've got Purani Haveli, or The Monster Wakes, from 1989. This is essentially a haunted mansion movie. We've got a young woman who is our lead character, who is the daughter of a very rich man who has passed away, and she's now living with her aunt and uncle. And her aunt and uncle are horrible people who just want to get married off to one of the wife's relatives so that they can keep her money in the family and they can keep controlling her and her money. But she inherits a mansion, and it turns out this mansion is haunted by an evil entity who is basically a monster who wants to go around killing people. There's this old guy who's like the caretaker of this monster trying to keep him at bay. It's a pretty forgettable movie. There's the young lovers stuff is because the aunt and uncle want her to marry other uncle, basically, who's a horrible guy, and she really is in love with this other guy, and they've got their doomed lovers thing that her aunt and uncle are trying to keep her from. This guy is my least favorite male lead in these movies. He's really boring. He doesn't have the looks for a leading man. I don't feel like he just doesn't have the charisma. And something else that's a problem with a lot of these movies, that's the biggest problem here, is usually the female lead kind of knows what's going on. She sees the spooky stuff. She sees that there's some horrifying supernatural horror going on, and she'll tell everyone, and the male lead will blow it off and be like, oh, you silly girl. Silly girl gets said a lot in these movies. You're imagining this. You're dreaming this. Aren't you adorable? That's ridiculous. That would never happen. And you can understand why they feel like that because they wouldn't assume there's definitely a ghost around. But it's a horror movie, so we as the audience know he's wrong, but he's supposed to be our hero, but he's just kind of being a jerk to his girlfriend when she really knows what's up. And this guy is the worst offender of that. He does it constantly. It's really annoying. He just comes across like a dumb jerk. The comedy in this movie is bad. The musical numbers, I don't even remember. The two most remarkable things about the movie are, one, the monster is actually warded off by Christian iconography, like crosses and things. And for most of these movies, it's like, Hinduism, I think. It's iconography of Hinduism, a religion in India. It makes sense. And this one, it actually takes a lot of, Western horror influences in that regard. So that's kind of interesting. And there's also a scene that's very Nightmare on Elm Street-like, where the monster's hands burst out of a bed and pull someone down like into the bed, very much like Freddy Krueger. And that shot's pretty cool. Next up, Tahkhana, or The Dungeon, from 1989. So this movie is a treasure hunting movie. What happens is this old guy is dying and he leaves all of his possessions to one of his sons and nothing to the other son, because the other son has gotten lost in black magic and sorcery. And the sorcerer's son is like, well, screw you. I'm going to use my sorcery to actually get everything I want. So he tries to revive this monster that he calls a demon god, but he ends up not being successful because people will catch up to his plan, and they end up trapping him in this like underground dungeon with this demon god, and he's down there for 20 years. Now, there's also these two sisters that I think are the kids of the good son, if I remember right. And for some reason, they end up getting separated because the sorcerer's son does something to the other sister. I'm having trouble remembering. But the two sisters each have a necklace. And if you put each of their necklaces together, they form a treasure map to lead to the treasure that the dying guy took the location of to his grave, basically. We then kick up years in the future. The one sister who did not get lost is now an adult. Her and her boyfriend want to go find this treasure. So they have to locate their other sister so they can get the map. So it's a treasure hunting movie where there is a monster or a demon god that is guarding the treasure that they have to deal with. This movie is way shorter. It's actually 2 hours long, and it kind of keeps everything that's good about these movies and gets rid of most everything that's bad. I feel like this is more of a normal movie that most any horror fan could enjoy. It's only got 2 musical numbers. They're pretty short, not too invasive. There's very little intrusive, ridiculous comedy that doesn't fit. And there's also some human horrors in there too, with one character who is a really horrible person. And when I read the letterbox reviews for this movie, it seems a lot of people just didn't like this movie because of how much they hated him. But overall, I kind of respected that this movie went there in terms of some darker themes that didn't just involve a spooky monster, but an actual human monster. Overall, this movie is almost less of a horror movie and more of an adventure treasure hunting movie where there is a demon god who is guarding the treasure that they have to deal with. I don't know why they call him a god. There's nothing particularly godlike about him. He's just a monster guy and he's spooky, but he's a pretty cool looking monster. Now, as far as the cast, this reunites a lot of the people from Piranha Mande, but also adds in some new people as well. Like this guy who's clearly supposed to be Rambo. He looks like Rambo. Somebody makes a joke by calling him Rambo at one point, and he's awesome. He's like our action hero in the middle of this movie. And I would say overall, Tahkhana has the most attractive cast. So, you know, take that for what you will. Now we're getting into the 90s with Bandh, Darza, which is another 2.5 hour movie. And this is kind of the Bollywood homage to Hammer vampire films. Most of these movies have very original monsters. This is very much a Hammer vampire. It's actually the same actor who played Samri in Piranha Mande. He brings his scary physical presence to this movie just as well. And I would say he functions very much like Christopher Lee in Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Mostly dialogueless, but just a terrifying presence with a fantastic, classic gothic vampire look. Now, this movie has an awesome opening. We kick off with a couple who really wants to have a kid, but they just can't conceive. The wife goes to desperate measures, led by their housekeeper. She goes to Black Mountain, which is this place that everybody fears where all of the spooky satanic worshipers are. And she takes her to the master, who is our vampire, and promises that if she makes a promise, she can have a child. And that promise is if the kid is a boy, then good luck, have a good life, you get to have a kid, good for you. If it's a girl, then she belongs to the master and she must be surrendered to Black Mountain. And the kid ends up being, can you guess it? Yes, a girl, but the girl does not get handed over. The monster is full of wrath because of this. And then we go forward in time again, about 20 years, where this young daughter is now an adult, but the wife has been murdered by the vampire. You would think that daughter would end up being our lead character, but no, it ends up being some other random girl. And the daughter is kind of the bad girl, I guess because she came from very spooky origins. And we deal with a very soap opera like romance where the girl of the vampire really wants to steal our main girl's boyfriend, and he's kind of bouncing back and forth, and she ends up getting involved in sorcery to be able to get him. So then our main couple's kind of dealing with that, trying to avoid the black magic turning his heart, basically. This movie is pretty good. Musical numbers are pretty standard, but there's very little stupid comedy peppered in, no comedy subplot. The main cast is okay. I wasn't a big fan of them, especially the guy. He just seems kind of schlubby for a guy that's getting fought over by two beautiful women. The cast is okay. The movie's very repetitive. It would be so much better if it was just not 2.5 hours, because especially when we get to the third act of this movie, just feels like we're spinning the same wheels over and over again. Like monster attacks, something wards him off, he runs away. Monster attacks, something, you get it. But I would say the craziest thing about this movie is the score, because they rip off like every horror score under the sun. The Friday the 13th theme is going through most of this movie. The Exorcist theme is in there. It's even got the club song from Fright Night. I don't need a book to show me how. Loving you is all that matters. I love that song, and I learned from one of the special features that Fright Night's actually one of the most ripped off movies within Bollywood. There's a ton of Fright Night ripoffs. I kind of feel like I have to see them now. So that's the 5th movie, and the end of the movies that feel very much of a piece. The last film in here is Atma, or The Ghost. And while that last movie was in 1990, this is 2006. It's way, way ahead in the future and has a completely different feel. This is not a monster movie like all the rest are. This kicks off with a couple dealing with the guy's mother passing away, and she gets possessed by a demon, and the movie becomes very much an Exorcist, Evil Dead type thing briefly, and then that ends, and then we go to our main characters. And it becomes clear that opening scene has nothing to do with anything. But the actual story of this movie, I don't know, just seems like so random. But our main character is a doctor who does a lot of post-mortem autopsies for the police. And he's visited by a guy who we later finds out is a ghost, who says, hey, when you do my autopsy, just print the truth. And he's like, okay. And then he gets visited by these mobsters who are like, hey, when you do this autopsy, you need to say this guy died of natural causes, or we're going to kill your wife. But if you do it, we'll give you money. And he has so much integrity. So he's like, oh no, I don't know what to do. So a lot of this movie is him dealing with these mobsters and trying to figure out, what to say on this autopsy report. But when he does give in to the mobsters, because he doesn't want his beautiful wife, to get killed, that's when the ghost of the autopsy body guy ends up haunting them and possesses his wife. And then it becomes like an Exorcist kind of possession thing. Now that sounds pretty good. Sounds kind of consistently interesting. This is the shortest movie. It's under 2 hours, but I did not like this movie. I enjoyed the very 80s feel of the other ones. They're shot on film. They have practical effects. This is shot so digitally. It looks like a soap opera. I just hated how it looked. It's goofier even than the other movies. It's just so goofy in just a cringy way that I did not like at all. It's full of bad CGI. Instead of great practical effects, we have a lot of crappy CGI. The cast is just so, beautiful, but generic, nothing there. I didn't like this movie at all. Was just not a fan. I like the 80s feel of these movies. When we get into this very 2000s slick digital thing, hated it, hated the musical numbers. I'll take the musical numbers in the older ones over these any day of the week. You could say some good things about this movie in terms of having a pretty tight plot, in terms of not being too long. But I mean, if the best thing you can say about a movie is it's not too long, that's not super great. It's still almost 2 hours long, which is kind of long for a normal horror movie. But I just hated the way it felt. And I didn't like it. But that's all 6 Bollywood horror films that I saw. This was overall a pretty cool experience. And yeah, if you have any interest in these, if you want to venture into that weird side of horror cinema, I say go for it. Thank you so much for watching this crazy video on Bollywood horror. Have you seen any Bollywood horror films? Let me know down in the comments below. And definitely check out this playlist over here for all my Blu-ray 4K reviews. I've actually got a lot of other horror box set reviews on there, so you might just enjoy that. Give a subscribe if you did enjoy this, and a like as well. I would appreciate it. Thank you again for watching. With all that said, don't forget to enjoy yourself today, have some fun, and I'll see you next time.